Welcome to the, I hope you can hear me well. Welcome to the very first webinar of the ENEFIRST Plus project. Today, the topic we will deal with is about integrating energy efficiency first in the national energy and climate plans. And as you know, that will, let's say the news currently are about preparing the final update of these plans of the NECPs. The final update is due by the end of June 2024, so in 4 months from now. You can see here the different speakers we have for today. Just reminding briefly the agenda. Veronika Jerikova from the Commission will provide us with a summary of the assessment of the draft update of the NECPs. Then Susanna Pato from the Regulatory Assistance Project will provide an overview of what the Fit for 55 package has brought to the implementation of energy efficiency first. We'll then have a panel discussion with Christos Tokolias from the Greek Agency for Renewable Energy and Energy Savings and Vesna Bukarika from the Energy Institute of Croatia to have 2 concrete examples about how it goes in their country. Then we will finish with insights from 2 complementary projects, SEED MICAT and the MICAT tool presented by Niklas Wenfeld from Fraunhofer ASAI, and the RegioFirst project presented by my colleague Vlasis Oikonomou, and I have the pleasure to co-coordinate ENEFIRST Plus with Vlasis for the next 3 years. The project has started last November. Some quick rules that you are familiar with for webinars. Your camera and microphones are disabled, but if you want to speak during the panel discussion, you can raise your hand. You can also send your questions in the chat at any time. We'll try to cover as many as possible. After the 2 first presentation, we'll take clarification questions, and then we can have more detailed questions during the panel discussions. And all the presentations and recording will be available after the event on the website of the project. I will start very quickly with an introduction of ENEFIRST Plus, and I thank here my colleague Axel who prepared this slide. So in a nutshell, this project is a follow-up. Some of you may be familiar with the previous ENEFIRST project. That was a research project focused on the implementation of energy efficiency first in the building sector. So here, in this continuation, we go from research to implementation. That's more a practical view that we adopt, and also not limited to the building sector. We can look at whatever sector is relevant depending on the countries we will be working with. The consortium is made by a combination of Energy Institute, energy agencies, and research labs and think tanks. And the general approach, that's what you see here, it's to plug energy efficiency first in the current practices. So we don't plan to develop completely new processes or tools, but rather to look at what the stakeholders and policymakers are currently using for their decision making already now, and whether it needs some adaptation, some enhancement, so that it's in line with the energy efficiency first principle. In terms of objectives and outputs, the project has mainly 4 pillars. One that is developing resources, would be, for example, some further guidance about cost-benefit analysis. There will be also pilot cases to test these resources and also to make more detailed analysis about real-life situations. This will be complemented by learning cycles with the objective to go beyond the 4 countries that are partners in this project, and overall to grow a community of practice and develop for as many stakeholders as possible the knowledge and capacities to implement energy efficiency first. All that is in iterative process with many interaction between the four axes. The policy background, probably most of you know. So when the Energy Union was adopted, energy efficiency was included in one of its 5 dimensions. In the package for clean energy for all European proposed in 2016 and adopted in 2018, the principle of energy efficiency first was defined and set as an overarching principle, especially to prepare the NECPs. That was done as part of the governance regulation. Then in 2021, the Commission published its first recommendation and guidelines on energy efficiency first, and last September, the recast of the Energy Efficiency Directive was published, and that you will learn more from Suza's presentation later on. About the pilot countries and partner countries, that's Croatia, the Energy Institute for Croatia, Greece, CREST that I presented, and for these two you will hear from Vesna and Christos. And then we have also Italy represented with the National Energy Agency, and Poland with CAPE, which is also the energy Savings Energy Conservation Agency for Poland. And these case studies will cover different situations that include energy planning, incentive schemes, and cost-benefit analysis methodology, working with different types of stakeholders, could be a transmission system operator, distribution system operator, municipalities in charge of local heating and cooling plants, or CECAP, Sustainable Energy and Climate Action Plans, for example. There will be 2 cycles of pilot countries. You see again the partners, and that's it for the introduction. And you can see the hashtag to follow us on social media, or if you want also to make comments to the project, and the website of the project. With that, I hand it over to Veronica for an update about the Commission's assessment of the draft NECP update.
Thank you, Jean-Sébastien. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Veronika Jiříčková. I'm a policy officer in DG Energy, where I work in the Energy Efficiency Unit, and I focus on energy efficiency first. So today I will provide you with an overview of the assessment of how the Energy Efficiency First principle was incorporated by member states in the draft NECP updates. So I think we can go to the next slide, where before getting to the assessment itself, I just wanted to recall the main provisions from the governance regulation when it comes to what are the requirements on energy efficiency first. So when you have a look at the governance regulation, I would say the first 2 bullet points are the main requirements. So first, energy efficiency first is the overarching and guiding principle. And member states should take it into account in the interlinkages between the 5 dimensions of the Energy Union. So what are the 5 dimensions? It's decarbonization, energy efficiency, energy security, internal energy market, and research, innovation, and competitiveness. So you can already see that there is some scope for interlinkages. For example, to achieve decarbonization, of course, energy efficiency is a means to do that. For energy security, obviously, energy efficiency as well, there's an interlinkage. So this is one of the requirements. The second requirement, which is explicitly mentioned for 2 dimensions, is that policies and measures in dimension energy security and in dimension internal energy market should reflect energy efficiency first. So it's not just that the NECP should, let's say, declare that, energy efficiency first will be the guiding and overarching principle, but very concretely, member states should describe policies and measures which will constitute the application of the energy efficiency first in the 2 dimensions. I mean, at least in these 2 dimensions. Because we'll be talking about energy efficiency first, I thought it was important to also say what it is. So what do we mean by energy efficiency first? I think there are still some misconceptions about it. It doesn't mean energy efficiency at all costs. It doesn't mean only end-use energy savings, but it means consideration of energy efficiency measures before making any planning decisions on new energy infrastructure. As you can see in the definition, I didn't put the definition here, I put recital 64 of the governance regulation. It clearly says that the consideration of the energy efficiency alternatives means that we consider cost-efficient energy efficiency measures, measures which are technically and economically feasible and environmentally sound. So again, this is not about energy efficiency first, always at all costs, but there are some clear boundaries. And as I already mentioned, we're not talking about end-use energy savings only, but some important alternatives are also demand response, very important, and more efficient conversion, transmission, and distribution of energy. So these should be the alternatives which are considered as opposed to new infrastructure. Now to the EU-wide assessment of the draft NECP updates. So member states were asked to submit the draft updates by June last year. Not all of them actually submitted on time, and there are still 2 member states which have not submitted to this day, Austria and Poland. So at the time that the Commission published the assessment, it was in December last year, only 21 member states were taken into account, those who submitted on time. And what we can see when we look at the energy efficiency first is that it was reflected in several policy areas in Cyprus, Cyprus's draft, and some member states covered the principle at least in some policy areas. So you can see the list. It includes Czechia, Greece, Lithuania, Luxembourg, Malta, Netherlands, Romania, Slovakia, and Spain. We will look at a sample of some of these later on, but I would just like to already say here that some of the member states, while they mentioned the principle, in many cases it was mentioned once or twice, and it was mentioned rather, as I said at the beginning, that it is going to be the overarching principle, but there are not really concrete measures in those 5 dimensions. So the conclusion would be that it's important for the final updated NECPs to be more explicit and detail how actually the principle is planned to be applied. So now I chose a few member states to have a look at how they incorporated the energy efficiency first. So Cyprus was one of those who mentioned energy efficiency first the most, and in most, let's say, dimensions. So you can see that in the decarbonization dimension, Cyprus highlights that other decarbonization measures, for example, uptake of renewables, will only be pursued if energy efficiency actions are deemed impractical or very costly. So this is a good example of energy efficiency first taken into account. Cyprus also mentions in dimension research, innovation, and competitiveness. Again, kind of putting energy efficiency against renewables. And in this dimension, one of the goals is when decoupling economic activity from using fossil fuels, increasing energy efficiency first, and only then maximizing the use of renewables. And then Cyprus is one of those member states who also go a bit further, and they have a whole chapter on planned policies and measures in many areas, including buildings, industry, transport, heating and cooling, where it's clearly said that priority will be given to policies and measures which reduce primary or final energy consumption and improve energy security. So there is a clear link emphasizing energy security. And other measures will only be taken if energy efficiency are deemed impractical or very costly. So I would say these are some good examples which can be taken from the Cyprus draft NECP update. If we go to another example, this is from Czechia. Under the energy security dimension, some policies and measures in the heating sector mention that the transformation of the heating sector will not only be done through a switch of fuel, so in the case of Czechia, from coal to gas, but also that an important part of the heating sector transformation will be to look at the reduction in consumption for final customers and a close alignment with long-term building renovation strategy. So this is a very good example of how you can align planning in heating and cooling and, for example, urban planning or the long-term building renovation strategy. So not looking at the sectors separately, but rather really in alignment, especially when it comes to heating and cooling supply and building renovation. We can go to the next one. So this is Slovakia, where we can see another good example in the energy efficiency dimension, specifically focusing on industry, where Slovakia mentions a new measure, a competitive system. And there I highlighted in green that this is going to be an investment. No, it's going to be a program supporting investment projects to reduce energy intensity in industry. And one of the criteria for granting this support will be if the project complies with the energy efficiency first principle. So it's going to be one of the conditions to be granted the financial support. So again, a good example of energy efficiency first, which is one of the criteria or enabling conditions for getting financial support. We can go to the next example. So this is from Lithuania, where in the energy efficiency dimension, one of the provisions which is mentioned on energy efficiency first is from the Lithuanian law on natural gas, where it stipulates a clear obligation for TSOs, gas TSOs, but also DSOs to take account of the energy efficiency first when drawing up the 10-year network development plans. So again, this highlights the focus that when developing 10-year network development plan, it should also be looked at energy efficiency and not only, starting from the hypothesis that there is the need to develop the network, but rather to look at energy efficiency, take it into consideration, and see whether some of the network development can actually be delayed or replaced altogether. I think I have one more example. Yes. So this is from Malta. And here, this is not a good example, I would say, but this is rather to highlight what I mentioned at the beginning and the misconception about energy efficiency first, where Malta says in the NECP that it plans to take energy efficiency first into account, but it highlights that it's not going to be considered as the main factor, and that other factors will actually have more importance, such as security of supply and cost efficiency. And again, I would like to say here that for energy efficiency first, it doesn't mean that it's energy efficiency first always, but it's about considering several options, obviously taking into account security of supply and cost efficiency. So yes, I just wanted to highlight this example here where maybe this is still based on a misconception of energy efficiency first. I'm not sure if there's one more example. Yes, okay, this is Spain. Again, this was one of those examples where a member state mentioned energy efficiency first, but it's rather vague. It only says that the implementation of the principle is going to be essential, but there are no concrete policies or measures which are put forward. So I would say this was the majority of the updates, which only mentioned the principle, but didn't propose any concrete action. And I wanted to conclude with some good examples which could be seen in the 3 dimensions of what it means to really consider energy efficiency first. So when you look at the energy security dimension, one of the measures which member states should mention is how they will increase diversification of energy supply from third countries with the purpose to reduce energy import. And here, if energy savings are considered as a kind of domestic source of energy, which is taken into account, then this is application of the energy efficiency first. Then when we look at energy efficiency dimension, this I already mentioned in the case of Czechia. So again, alignment of heating and cooling planning and long-term renovation strategies is a good example of energy efficiency first. And as a final example, if we look at the dimension internal energy market, then from the perspective of energy efficiency first, the proper implementation of the Electricity Directive and electricity regulation is a very good example of energy efficiency first, because if these 2 legal acts are properly implemented, it enables market access of demand-side resources. And as we saw at the beginning, demand-side resources are also one of the energy efficiency alternatives which are to be considered under energy efficiency first. So not only end-use savings, but also demand response. Yeah, so that would be it from my side.
Thanks a lot, Veronica. I think it was very, very useful and welcome to see the diversity of examples. And also, I think we can see that there has been quite some progress compared to the first round of NECPs in 2019, both in the understanding of the principle and in the way to demonstrate how it can be implemented. There is no question from the chat yet, but we can come back to you after Suza's presentation. So not to lose time, I suggest we switch directly to Suza's presentation, and I invite all participants to put their questions to Veronica's in the chat, and we can come back to you after Suza's presentation. Suza, the floor is yours.
Hello everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Zsuzsa Pato. I work for REP, Regulatory Assistance Project. I mainly work on power markets, so it's kind of strange that I'm going to talk about energy efficiency, but by now, after Veronica's presentation, you must probably realize that efficiency first is not about the classical end-use energy efficiency only, so it has lots of connections with networks and markets. Today I will talk about the Fit for 55 package. Like before we had some discussion of the NECPs, now let's have a look how these various pieces of legislation interpret and implement or try to make the whole principle understandable for those who has to implement these pieces of legislation. So I will talk about 2 pieces which has been already put into effect. So one is the new EED, the Energy Efficiency Directive, and I will touch upon several key principles or articles. And the other one is the Renewable Energy Directive. And I will talk a little bit about the EPBD, about buildings. We have the political agreement already, but the final text is not out yet. But I don't think a lot will change. So going back to the definitions, we talk so much about the definition of this principle because it's a very elusive concept, I would say. So this is from the recital of the EED. So the first one by Veronica was from the governance regulation. This is from the new directive. Ideally, they should mean the same thing. I would like to highlight 2 things. One is, although the text talks about energy efficiency solutions, and because this is a very heavily vested concept, a concept energy efficiency we use for decades. So personally, I don't think it was a very good choice to call energy efficiency solutions when we actually talk about much more than energy efficiency per se. as you see in the second line, it includes demand-side resources and system flexibilities. So it's better if you think about it as demand-side resources. And supply-side resources are the infrastructure. So whenever you want to build or contemplate building a new infrastructure, let it be network, let it be gas, power, heating, whatever, hydrogen, or generation facilities, so power plants or windmills or electrolyzer or whatever, that's the infrastructure. So whenever you think about or a country thinks about building such an infrastructure, first it should consider whether we actually need that infrastructure, whether is it better to invest that money to the demand side and see whether we need the infrastructure at all. Next slide, please. So the famous Article 3, this is a new article of the EED, and it's devoted to efficiency first. And these are the key items within Article 3. So one is that these solutions, energy efficiency solutions, but as we discussed, it's much more than energy savings, assessed both in planning, in policy decisions, and major investment decisions. So basically that covers everything. A second important aspect is it's not about energy systems only, but it should be implemented in non-energy sectors. Again, this is not an easy concept. You should think about it as end users. So all the end user sectors, for example, the water sector or water utilities or agriculture or whoever, or industry. So basically it's in the whole economy. The second and the third has an element which is about the governance of this principle within the member states. So now each member state should appoint a relevant authority to ensure the application and of course to monitor the application. And as we've discussed before by Veronica, this principle should be reported. The implementation should be reported in the NECPs. We've seen that it's not going like really fast, but let's see how the final NECPs will look like. A third important element is some tools. How do you compare option A with option B, whether to build a new network element or invest, let's say, in demand-side flexibility? You have to have a cost-benefit methodology. You have to do a CBA. Most of the time, investments are done after CBAs, but the big question is whether these already used CBAs consider all the benefits, especially on the demand side. The issue with the benefits on the demand side, for example, of energy saving or flexibility, that these are much more difficult to monetize, to capture. So often they just left out. And of course, then the result of the CBA will be biased. Next slide, please. Article 25 and 26, it's about planning. So this is, as I said, it's planning, policy, and investment. So this is about planning, more specifically about heating and cooling plans. There are a few new issues, new requirements in the EED, which is relevant to efficiency first. First of all, these national heating and cooling plans needs to be developed, which is not new. The new thing is that they have to be included in the NECPs. So the NECP is really the big reporting framework, and this should be an element of it from now on. The new item or the new requirement is that next to the national plans, regional and local heating plans needs to be developed. So it could be at the regional level or at the city level. And here it's important to note that new actors probably needs to be involved in these plannings. For example, heating planning at the local level, the city governments. What is really explicit in this article that member states has to coordinate their renewable visions or renewable policies and heating and cooling policies and planning. So this is an explicit requirement to coordinate the two, to integrate these two sectors. I think the future of all this planning is going to be that actually we had to step out of the silos, both the fuel silos and the demand and supply silos, those who actually build just network and those who deal with energy efficiency. And we have to integrate all these aspects. If you don't, we can still do it, but it will be very, very costly. The next one is about efficient district heating and cooling system. Here, again, we see the attempt of the directive to combine decarbonization, like substituting fossils by renewables, and efficiency requirements, both end-use efficiency and system efficiency, like how efficient these coolings and the heating and cooling systems are. Again, ideally, at the end, you would have a portfolio of measures or investments that part of it is targeting to change the fuel, and the other one is to reduce the overall energy demand. And of course, there are various measures on both sides with various costs. So the idea that you come up with an optimum portfolio of investments. My assessment of this article that there are some nice tries to include both the supply but also the demand side, but it's still very much heavily supply oriented. There are two references to the demand side. One is that these plans should consider the demand forecast, which is, I think, should be a common sense, but it's explicitly said in the text. And the other one is the long-term renovation strategies. And we've seen in Veronica's presentation that some member states, they already do it. Next slide, please. Article 27. This is about NRAs. The NRAs are not, that's not the National Rifle Association, but the National Regulatory Authorities. And the EED vests some new roles and tasks with regard to infrastructure planning and infrastructural decisions. Why the NRAs are important actors? Because most of these infrastructures, well, at least the networks, they are regulated assets. So whoever invests in the network needs to have the approval of the NRA, because at the end, the NRA decides what investments can have a green light, and the cost needs to be spread across the consumers in the form of tariffs. So the new aspects are that the CBAs, again, the NRAs have to make sure that the cost-benefit assessments are, let's say, efficiency first harmonized. So they have to take into account the wider benefits of the demand-side options, demand-side flexibility, energy efficiency, energy savings, etc. The second one is that the NRAs have to make sure that whenever the TSOs and the DSOs, they submit their network development plans, this is the state of affairs, this is how things are now, when they approve, they have to check whether this principle has been applied or not. Ideally, if it's not, that they have to reject the network development plan. It happens sometimes, rejecting network development plans for some other reasons, but this is going to be a new reason. And may provide methodologies on the cost-benefit analysis. So it's a new thing for a TSO or a DSO to include all kinds of demand-side benefits as well. So there is a need for capacity building there. And the NRA might, be active in this front and come up with a new methodology. And also incentive-based regulation for innovation for network companies. This is a huge, huge topic, but roughly it is about coming up with financial incentives for DSOs and TSOs that they have an incentive to think about demand-side solutions and not only building new network assets. So in summary, there is nothing really new in this article. whatever is here has been already said in the Electricity Directive and Regulation from 2019, but this makes it a bit more concrete and, most importantly, going beyond electricity, because these are applicable to the gas infrastructure as well. Next slide, please. The Renewable Directive, the Renewable Energy Directive, I just picked one aspect, which is the district heating. As we've discussed before, in the EED, there is the definition of efficient district heating. Here in the Renewable Directive, there is an increased renewable target for renewable heat. And very importantly, this definition includes waste heat and cold as well. So whatever would otherwise would be wasted, if it's used, then it can be accounted against the target. When it discusses new renewable district heating, it discusses it together with energy storage, thermal energy storage, demand response, and power to heat installation, which again shows a kind of a cognitive shift that we consider all these options together and then make sure that we pick the right portfolio of them. Very important to understand that efficient buildings, so even buildings are linked to Renewable Energy Directive, to the Energy Efficiency Directive, and to all these directives. So they are really cross-cutting issues, that if you have efficient buildings, then you can move from high to low heat district heating, which can be served by heat pumps. So you can ditch gas or oil or coal. And if you have like large-scale district heat pumps, they provide flexibility for the power system, which eventually facilitates more variable renewables to the power system. So this is a very good example to see how much linkages are across the fuels and the sectors. Next slide, please. And lastly, about the EPBD, as I said, we don't have the final text yet, but if you read the last version, you could see some implementation, some seeds of implementation of the principle there as well. Of course, the EPBD is primarily a demand-side kind of directive because it wants to improve the energy performance of buildings. So this is like the general setting. And of course, the energy performance of buildings, which is a huge end-use sector in Europe and elsewhere as well, it has implications for everything upstream. So electricity, gas, heating, grids, and also generation. But this is not mentioned in the directive. So the directive doesn't make this link really explicit. It talks about setting up building renovation passport schemes, which is behind the meter, so at the building level, it could guarantee an optimum mix of energy efficiency and renewable investments for decarbonization, for the decarbonization of the building stock. The last point, which is relevant here, is about the hardware linkage of buildings with electrified transport. So some provisions about charging points in buildings, new buildings, renovated building, etc. And you might think of three ideas, which is in the directive. One is pre-cabling. So even if you don't put the charging point now, put the cables to the new building so you can easily put the charging point later. The second important issue is so that the charging points are smart. What does it mean to be smart? That it can be, it can start and stop charging based on price signals automatically. And the last one is bidirectional, so that it gives the opportunity for vehicle to grid flexibility. And I think this is my last slide, and yeah, and I was long. Okay, thank you very much.
No, Susa, that was perfect and concise and to the point as usual. Before we move to the panel, there is one question from the chat that can be relevant to both of you, Veronica and Susa. That's Jamal Bashir asking whether energy efficiency first include as well energy conservation and effectiveness, or if it would be about efficiency only. And I would even rephrase a bit the question to include whether you see energy efficiency first, including sufficiency as well, because that makes also the link with the use of resources and not only energy. So maybe, I don't know, Veronica, maybe you want to start and then so that you can complement.
Yeah, thank you. I was reading the question. I was wondering what would be the difference between energy effectiveness and efficiency. So maybe
Sure.
if Jamal, if you would like to take the floor to expand a little bit.
Yes, but I'm not sure I can.
All right.
Let me check.
Well,
okay, your mic is oh. Okay, I make you a presenter. You know, you should be able to speak now. Normally. Yeah, but Veronica, if you want to discuss about sufficiency in the meantime.
So there is actually now a debate inside the Commission about energy sufficiency. So this would be a much broader concept where we would also be looking at, can we live on smaller footprints? Can we basically reduce our needs? But we're not there yet. So at the beginning, there was also a discussion whether it would be efficiency first or energy efficiency first. And in the end, in the Commission, it was decided that it would be energy efficiency first principle. So I can only repeat, I think, what I said earlier on, that the definition says that energy efficiency first. Well, what's important is first that it's about consideration of alternatives. So it's not that we always choose energy efficiency. So it's about consideration of alternatives. And these alternatives include energy savings. So that would be energy conservation, I guess. It includes being more efficient when it comes to conversion of energy, transmission and distribution, and that it also looks at flexibility. So can we shift demand to different time slots? So that will be my contribution to this question.
That's very clear. I don't know, Suza, if you want to add on this.
Well, I can only share my own conception on sufficiency. I've never worked on sufficiency. I don't believe that we can solve sufficiency by telling people to do less. I think there are two ways. One is actually new generations. I can see that they have a different idea of the world. So they just do less, they consume less, they consume differently because they want to. And the other option, which is also important, and I'm an economist, so we actually have to make people pay the real price of their consumption. And then so it's not me or the governance or whoever telling that you should only consume as much, but then you make your trade-offs. So whether you will consume X or Y or how much. So I think sufficiency is very, very important, but it's a very theoretic discussion, and politically it's also very vested. But I can see that people consume differently now than they used to consume 10 years ago, and I see lots of good tendencies.
Okay. Thanks, Suza. I think that's also a clear message. Before we move to the panel, I'm sorry, Jamal, but we are a bit short of time, so you can exchange with me in the chat if you will need further clarifications on your question. There is one last question we take before the panel. That's from Rafael Silslak. Sorry for my pronunciation of the name. Is there any direct link between energy efficiency first principle and energy performance contracting, which is also much promoted by the ED recast? So I don't know, Veronica, maybe you want to react on that one.
Well, I wouldn't say that there's a direct link in the sense that the ED recast obviously has a whole dedicated article on energy efficiency first. That's Article 3. And then it is mentioned in 2 other articles, in Article 7 on public procurement and Article 27, as mentioned by Susa. But when it comes to energy performance contracting, I'm just thinking as I speak, but energy performance contracting is really, I mean, it's linked to renovation of buildings and energy savings and the payback. So I wouldn't say that there is a clear link because it really focuses on the renovation of buildings. And as I mentioned, what we're looking at with the energy efficiency first principle would be more the integration of supply and demand. So I'm not sure that energy performance contracting also, when it comes to the renovation of the buildings, looks at, for example, heating and supply, heating and cooling supply. But I'm not an expert on energy performance contracting, so yeah, happy to be corrected.
No, I think what you say is true in general. Then energy performance contracting can be a bit broader. It can be also connected to the supply of heating to the buildings, for example. So that in that sense, you could make a link with energy efficiency first. And the other link I would see is that as both of you said, the principle is clearly about making a fair comparison between the different options. And in that sense, by securing the energy savings due to the measurement and monitoring, the energy performance contracting can help to make energy efficiency or energy savings considered on an equal foot of supply side options. I would say, but okay, that's probably a bit beyond the scope of looking at the integration of energy efficiency first in the NECP, because that's a very specific topic and one possible approach to develop energy efficiency actions. But that's also an interesting question. I suggest, as time is running, we now move to the panel discussion, and I'm very pleased to invite to the floor Vesna Bukarika from Croatia and Christos Tokolias from Greece. And to start the discussion, I would like to ask to both of you if the principle in general, the energy efficiency first principle, has been a topic of discussion in your country. Did you see debates about it, or would you say that the awareness about this principle would be rather low? Maybe Vesna, you can start.
Yeah, thank you, and hello to everyone. Well, I would say that energy efficiency first principle is known in Croatia. Maybe to point out that after 2018 governance and ED adoption, actually energy efficiency first principle was explicitly introduced in our Energy Efficiency Act by stating that when creating sectoral policy, energy efficiency should be taken into account, but of course without any further guidelines how to actually implement it. Nevertheless, we did implement it. I will talk about it a little bit later. So it is known principle. It is mainly known in the building sector, I would say, and with recast EED and now start of the process of transposition. Actually, I expect the debate to be more heated about it. Actually, not maybe so much for energy sector, for entities, for energy planning or for TSOs or DSOs and regulatory agency. I think they will cope with that. But as we have started this discussion, non-energy sectors, especially transport sector, integration of this principle in these areas in decision making will be possibly challenging.
Thanks a lot, Vesna, and thanks for raising transport, because that's maybe something that some of you may have spotted also in Veronica's presentation, that there are examples in almost all sectors, but transport, unless I'm mistaken. And now, Christos, what's your view about how Energy Efficiency First would be discussed in Greece?
Thank you, Jean-Sebastian. Hello to everyone. Yes, even if the legislative framework has not been adopted yet in Greece in regards to the official, let's say, application of the Energy Efficiency First principle, the discussion has started. Because there is one open, let's say, discussion if it is acceptable to expand the existing natural gas infrastructure in order to cover additional cities for covering the heating demand, instead of investing of the existing main renovation program and to try to lower the energy demand. The regulatory authority has given an opinion based on the actual cost and the benefits that will be delivered. So yes, there is an informal discussion, very intensive discussion, without having, let's say, an official and standardized context, which obviously is required. Moreover, we managed to introduce a statement in our draft updated NECP, saying that, yes, we tend to apply, of course, the energy efficiency first principle, and we say that we are aiming to foster, to rank and to identify the most cost-effective intervention in order to fulfill the energy efficiency target, and of course to multiply and to facilitate the achievement of the multi-benefits from this intervention.
Thanks, Christos, and I like that you raised the topics of gas infrastructure. We may come back to that in the discussion later on, depending on the question from the participant as well. But Vesna, you mentioned earlier that you have already examples of implementation of energy efficiency first in Croatia, so maybe you can tell us a bit more about this.
Yeah, it's not really a breakthrough, and it has been done for years now, and it's in the building sector. I think we presented a lot about our energy renovation programs, but from the start, energy renovation programs in Croatia were focused on firstly reducing energy demand of the building, and then changing technical systems, introducing renewables, and so on. So we would say that this is a clear demonstration of energy efficiency first principles. We also did have conditions, and when I'm talking about energy renovation programs in Croatia, just for everyone to be clear what it is, it's subsidizing energy renovation for public sector, multi-apartment buildings, single-family houses, dominantly, not so much in commercial sector. So there are conditions for obtaining these subsidies, and these conditions were always reduced the heating demand of the building at least by 50%. And if you are in the category of worst performing buildings, there is no way that you can get a subsidy for changing just technical system without reducing the actual energy needs of the building. So I think this was a good example, and also the deeper the renovation is, you get the higher subsidy rate, and we are sticking to this principle in this period 2021-2030 also. although I may say that it's becoming really challenging to maintain it, especially with rollout of photovoltaics, which are quick solutions and are. And don't get me wrong, that's a good solution, but this rollout may a bit diminish this trying to maintain energy efficiency first principle in our building programs. So that's a good example, and I would say, well, practically the only implemented example that I can think of. Yeah.
No, thanks, Vesna. That's also in a way similar to the Fabric First approach that the Irish agency has developed, and when we discussed with them, that they presented in the previous ENEFIRST project, and I remember you as well. So if you want to know more about the renovation program, you can check the webinars of the previous ENEFIRST project. And there was similar issues in the fact that if you are more demanding in the conditions to get the subsidy, then that might also, at least at the beginning, decrease the number of projects that you support, which might be challenging also politically when you want to show more results. Christos, what about Greece? Would you have also a nice example to share, or do you want to come back maybe to the opposite case, where maybe energy efficiency first should be taken into account before developing gas infrastructure, as you mentioned already?
Yes, correct. I think that I have already mentioned a bad example about how the design of the required energy infrastructure must be deployed and which criteria must be taken into consideration. There is an open discussion. For this reason, we have decided to focus mainly on the strategy that must be followed in order to promote the most effective, let's say, heating and cooling options, along with the requirements of the new Article 25 of the new directive. So emphasis will be given on this field, along with the requirements of Article 27. And for me, it's very challenging to create the framework for obliging all these energy system operators to comply with this principle. Yes, of course, as you imagine, we will introduce a specialized measure. We will appoint the authority, all these things that are mentioning in Article 3. But I think that it is important to establish a governance mechanism, a holistic within the framework of the NECP, mentioning explicitly the duties, the responsibilities of all these actors, which can be, yes, the energy regulator and distributors or other operators, the bodies who will be responsible in order to design the operational programs, the financing schemes, everyone to be aware of the responsibility and perhaps to have, let's say, the penalties that must be initiated in the case that the energy efficiency first principle will not be implemented. For this reason, it's very good that we have a very hot, let's say, discussion topic in Greece, which obviously it will affect the evolution of the energy sector, because we may be looking specific, let's say, technologies. And I think it's very important to have a transparent framework for applying this principle and to communicate all the results to all the involved parties, because the real outcome of the policy is, of course, to maximize the social welfare. This is the ultimate outcome of the NECP from my point of view.
Now, thanks, Christos. I think the governance point is very important, and I think Blazis will mention that also about the regional level when presenting Regio First. And that's nice that to complement Vesna's presentation, that was more about the carrot. So providing incentives to do more. And you mentioned the stick. Okay, so we see that we should act on all ends. Maybe a last question from my side before I turn to question from the participants. And please feel free to use either the chat or you may also see the Q&A panel for your questions. So my last question would be coming back to the NECP, because that's also the topic of this webinar. So how do you see how energy efficiency first has been addressed in the NECP of your country? And do you see some improvement differences between the first NECP in 2019 and the draft NECP update submitted last year? So Vesna, if you want to start.
Yeah, thank you. And I would like to thank Veronica for her presentation. It was really, really very informative, although without mentioning Croatia, but I will say now a few words. She said that some NECPs mentioned energy efficiency first explicitly, some didn't. In Croatia, actually, energy efficiency first principle was mentioned exactly 2 times in the whole document explicitly. One time being that we have a policy measure which is promoting energy efficiency first, but in building sector. So introducing all participants in building energy renovation process about that principle. And the second mentioning of energy efficiency first principle is stating that it was taken into account as overarching principle in energy planning or in energy modeling, in projections of our future energy consumption, both primary and final. So this is how explicit we were or we were not. But nevertheless, I think that although we have not been explicit, and we will correct it in the final update. Of course, there are these renovation programs that I mentioned, and they are implementing this principle. But also, Veronica mentioned energy security and internal market measures, and we actually do have measures that are trying to embrace this principle. For energy security, there is a development of energy storage systems, battery system, without which we will not have required renewable share also. Due to intermittency and so on. And in internal market, we also have demand response projects that should be roll out more. So these are the measures that are then also taken into account in modeling exercise, in projecting our future supply and demand. Actually, I was talking with my colleagues, modelers, and we start with the final energy demand, and with exactly this principle in buildings. Buildings are more than 40% in Croatia. Of final energy demand. So basically our projections are all taking into account, firstly, reducing, from X kilowatt hours per square meters to some heavily reduced consumption per square meter. And then we are also changing technologies, and we are changing fuel mix, and this is then input in supply side. I actually learned from my colleague also that the exercise was done for small exercise on penetration of electric vehicles, and how with optimal charging strategies of electric vehicles, we can actually reduce capacity demand. So I think there are really demonstrations of energy efficiency principles in planning, which are unfortunately not visible as we were not elaborating them. But that's NECP, that's a document. I think that the real job will be in actual implementation on project level, how to implement it. So yeah, that's and to answer your question whether it's there is a progress in relation to first NECP development. Yes, huge. Yeah.
No, thanks, Vesna, and that confirms also my impression after the presentation by Veronica. We see that clearly that's a different word compared to 4 years earlier. Huh? That's very clear. So Christos, what about you? How do you see the Greek NECP?
Of course, yes. Now it's not a controversial issue for discussion. Energy efficiency principle, there is the official definition, the new directive. So we have to integrate into, as I said, into our NECP. We will give priority and focus on describing all the planning approach which must be followed in order to prepare either the action plans or the development plans of the regulator. For this reason, we plan in the government axis that we had in the previous NECP, in the existing, let's say, to add as a measure the application of the energy efficiency first principle in order to highlight the necessity to maximize the synergies with the other dimension. Because I believe if we insert it as a isolated and dedicated measure within the energy efficiency dimension, perhaps to lose the connection with, as Susanne presented, the link with the renewable energy dimension, with the energy market dimension, with energy security. So somehow we have to highlight that it is an axis, a pillar which cover all the dimensions of the NECP, and of course to comply with all these requirements. It is very challenging to specify the conditions for applying this principle into the public procurement law, because it is mentioned in Article 7 and it's not very easy to apply the current, so more emphasis must be given. I like the discussion that Vensa started about how to integrate this principle in the modeling, because this is the interesting and the strange similarly issue, because we run a model. In Greece, we have times, we estimated the investment needs and the infrastructure, and we say afterward in the implementation that we have to apply this principle for the investments that have been decided in the NECP, which is the main policy instrument. So somehow it's very important to integrate the application of this principle during the modeling, because this is the policy umbrella of the country. We say that all the financing instrument, all the operator, administrators, regulator must comply with the requirements, but afterwards. For me, the first point is to integrate into the model to justify the selection. I don't know, perhaps this can be done with the integration of the externalities, to run one scenario with the private cost and another one with the, let's say, social cost, and to select the second one. I don't know. It's very interesting to discuss. But for me, it is strange. It's a contradictory activity that, okay, I have already decided the investment, but then I have to apply this test in order to confirm that are okay. But I think this is for the next NECP. We do not have the time to change the model.
No, exactly. That's an excellent point that you both raised, the link with modeling and preparing the scenarios. And as you say, yeah, in an ideal world, that should come first and not at the end. So I put in the chat the link of the scenarios that were developed in the previous project in ENEFIRST about this, where the approach to test or to integrate energy efficiency first were to consider different level of ambitions. In that case, for the renovation of buildings, but that could be done for other other sectors. Yeah, one of the conclusions from the partner who led that, and that was Tim Mendel from Fraunhofer SI, is also that this is quite demanding in terms of data, but also in terms of computation capacities, because in that case, and that's related to the question we had earlier about energy efficiency first being also about demand response, so the equilibrium or the balance of the electricity system at all times, which means that you need to model every hour of the year, which is much more demanding than modeling annual consumption, for example. Okay, I turn now to the question in the chat, and there is a first one that will also make possible to get Veronica back in the discussion, but that's also linked to what you just discussed. That's a question from Céline Carré, who asked whether you would know about examples where a member state would have reassigned planned investments that were initially planned for supplier grid infrastructure to energy savings measure instead, following an assessment using the energy efficiency first principle, which would be the ideal case, and a bit close to what you mentioned, Christos. But as far as I see from what you said, that's something you want to see. So maybe probably something that you have not seen yet, right? But I don't know, Veronica, if that's something that was mentioned in one of the draft NECP updates, maybe.
No, but I was just maybe I just wanted to make this point that NECP is a future plan, so it basically says what the plans are. So maybe a more appropriate would be to look at the NECPR, the progress report, or maybe when we assess a bit later whether the plan has been implemented or not. So it's not really relevant for the NECP, which is where you set the plan, what you are going to do as a member state. And we would have to check ex post whether it has been done, or an energy efficiency solution or replacing building of new infrastructure would be the chosen option. But I'm really not aware. We've been compiling some examples of energy efficiency first for the purpose of a guidance that we are now preparing on the transposition of Article 3. But the only examples that we came up were from the US. There are quite some examples in New York and in California. And then there was an example from the UK in the 1990s. So I'm afraid, yeah, we haven't been really able to find a relevant example from the EU yet.
So indeed, yes, we also analyzed some of the examples you mentioned, I think, in the ENEFIRST project. So you have in the chat, if you look, there is one link mentioning examples that I put earlier, where you can find some of these. And there were previously a report done by RAP where they collected other examples. So in total, I think when we did this review, the ones we found in ENEFIRST plus the previous one from RAP, that makes like more than 30, 35 examples, something like that, with a few of them being indeed about, but that was mostly, I think, about the distribution level, distribution grid. There was one in California, indeed, about a power plant that was not replaced, but yeah, I think it will be partly covered by storage now, from what I remember. There was previously in the past an example in the southeast of France, where a transmission line was cancelled after opposition of the population and the local authorities, which was supposed to be replaced by a combination of energy efficiency and renewable energies, but at the end it was mostly replaced by renewable energy and decentralized gas plant, because not enough means were put in the energy efficiency programs, unfortunately. Okay, let me check the next questions. We have a questions from Diandra von Dugin. Have you considered to make the link integration between the environmental impact assessment and the energy efficiency first principle? I guess, Veronica, that comes first to you, this one.
Yes, so this was the first, I think, feedback that we kept having from member states after the proposal of the ED recast was published. And we've had already some discussions with colleagues from the relevant DG. And it seems that there could be some synergies, although it's not so straightforward, because the environmental impact assessment looks, for example, at programs, which is a bit different from what we have in the EED, which is planning or policy decisions. But this is something that we have in the pipeline for this year, in the framework of a broader exercise where we will try to mainstream, and this is kind of a misused word, but we're trying to mainstream the energy efficiency first into other other fields, even transportation, for example, or in the better regulation. Better regulation. So we are exploring it. We've already had some contacts, but it doesn't seem to be so easy, even though it seems that it could be the relevant assessment where energy efficiency first could be put as one of the options. But this is still ongoing, work in progress.
Yeah, thanks, Veronica. Yes, Christos, if you want to add on that.
I fully agree with Veronica. I would like to add, but perhaps one point of synergy can be the quantification of the impacts. We have to ensure the consistency between the environmental assessment and the application of the energy efficiency first principle, so through using the same, let's say, quantification methods. To use the same, let's say, quantification method in order to assess the impacts, and using the same in the application of the energy efficiency first principle. It is important to have a robust, a common and consistent framework for these assessments.
Yeah. Thanks,
not to
Christos.
use a different method in the environmental assessment, impact assessment, and other unitary metrics in the energy efficiency first principle.
No, all clear. I don't know, Vesna, if you want to say a final word before we move to the two final presentation. I thank you a lot, Christos, Vesna, and Veronica. And now we will also learn from other projects, because there are, let's say, several projects that can contribute to provide support to the implementation of energy efficiency first, either directly or indirectly. And I'm happy to welcome to the stage now Niklas Reinfeldt from Fraunhofer SI, who will give a quick overview about CINEA that takes over the previous MICAT project and the MICAT 2. Niklas, the floor is yours.
Yes, thanks. Can you see my screen?
Yes, it's full screen. It's perfect.
Okay. Well, just I don't see it and with you, but it's fine. Okay, then good afternoon from my side. My name is Niklas Reinfeldt. I'm from Fraunhofer ISI, and I'm coordinating the CINEA project. The CINEA project in general, and also the precursor project MICAT, deals with multiple impacts of energy efficiency, and therefore I directly want to start with a short definition or a short explanation of what are multiple impacts of energy efficiency. In general, they are also known as co-benefits or multiple benefits, also non-energy benefits, or as referred to in the EED recast, wider benefits of energy efficiency. On the right side here, you can see some examples of such multiple impacts. Some are more obvious or more clear, directly clear. For example, energy savings or avoided GHG emissions. But of course, there could also be more indirect or less obvious impacts, such as, for example, impacts on energy security and import dependencies, macroeconomic impacts, also impacts on energy poverty. In general, such multiple impacts can accompany energy efficiency projects and provide additional arguments to implement energy efficiency measures. However, they are rarely reported until now. But if we now look at the recast of the EED, and also as it should be became clear in the previous presentations, now such co-benefits or multiple impacts have a strong link to the new Energy Efficiency Directive, and especially to the Energy Efficiency First principle. If we have a closer look at the Energy Efficiency principle, then we see that the paragraph 5a, for example, refers to those cost-benefit methodologies that allow a proper assessment of the wider benefits of energy efficiency solutions. So what we talked in the previous presentations about already, but also it's the impact on energy poverty is directly addressed. And as we have seen on the slide before, this could also be a multiple impact or a co-benefit of energy efficiency measures, of course. And last but not least, also to get the link to what the NECPs, Article 3.5d also provides for member states to report on how energy efficiency first has been integrated into the NECP progress reports, including an assessment of the application and benefits of the principle. So why is this so important that these multiple benefits are mentioned so explicitly here? So if we look at assessing different solutions, so on the one hand, more demand-side oriented energy efficiency solutions, and on the one hand, energy supply infrastructure solutions, then by ignoring multiple impacts, this undermines the cost effectiveness of energy efficiency solutions. Now, as a result or as a solution, the energy efficiency first principle calls for a fair comparison of energy supply and energy efficiency in energy-related decisions. And therefore, such an assessment of these multiple impacts is heavily important to have a clear view on the value of different solutions, but also to shift the economic balance in favor of energy efficiency. So, and exactly this is the point where we try to come up with a MECAT tool in the MECAT and SEED MECAT project. The objective of these two projects is to develop a comprehensive approach to estimate such multiple impacts of energy efficiency by providing a publicly available and easily usable online tool, the so-called MECAT tool. By doing so, we built on previous results of previous projects done in this area, especially the COMBI project and the multiple benefits of energy efficiency facility of the Odyssey Muir project. The intent is to go beyond this earlier multiple benefit approaches and to ensure to maximize usefulness for a large target group, so to have a really easy to use online tool. As now the SEED MECAT project is a second iteration already of the project, which started last December. Its main objective is to now support the EU and its member states at all governance levels in including such multiple impacts in the operationalization and implementation of the energy efficiency first principle based on this MECAT tool. On top of this, of course, we are working on improving the tool during the whole process, but also expanding the methodology to not only featuring demand-side energy efficiency measures, but also allowing the comparison with supply-side measures to be able to make exactly these comparisons between supply-side and demand-side and assessing or implementing the energy efficiency first principle via these comparisons, as we discussed previously in this meeting. And on top of that, of course, an extensive approach for capacity building on this tool to get really the tool out there and to help people putting some life into the energy efficiency first principle. So now I will give you a really short and comprehensive overview of how this MECAT tool works and what the quantification framework of this MECAT tool is. So we start on the left side with just the input data. It can be done by country, by energy carrier, and also by sector or measures. Then we go on to generate a quantified impact in physical units. Some of these quantified impacts can then use to generate monetized impacts, which then can, last but not least, be aggregated to be able to have a CBA in the end. So I will now give a really short overview of the 3 different steps in the coming slides. So the first step is the impact quantification. Here, the overall aim is, as I already mentioned, really to have the tool really useful for a broad target group and to cover a wide range of use cases. And therefore, it's really important to have an as easy input mask as possible. And therefore, we decided to go only for energy savings as the main input data you really need. So this one is mandatory, and all other parameters have either backup figures integrated in the tool if you're not familiar with how to adjust them. Or of course, if you have more detailed information, you're always allowed to adjust the further parameters to like really enhance the accuracy of the results. So all energy savings then, or all multiple impacts are then linked to impact functions via these energy savings. So we are starting by energy savings and then try to calculate the physical impacts across all these different areas for the multiple impacts. So the different social multiple impacts, but also economic ones and environmental ones. The second step afterwards is then the monetization of these impacts. This is especially important since this monetary value of the multiple impacts is often even higher, or at least comparable to the pure energy cost savings. And therefore, this assessment can significantly change the results of a CBA. Again, here we have some default monetization factors to be able to do this in the tool without the users are applied to have their own values, but all these values can again changed to have to investigate a little bit deeper into the results. And then the last step is the impact aggregation and the cost benefit analysis in the MICA tool. Here it's important to have a look that we don't have, there's no risk of double counting by really using a conservative approach, but also checking which impacts can be aggregated and which are left out or are already included indirectly in other multiple impacts. And then after this whole aggregation, the cost benefit analysis can be done. And also here the users can then make some sensitivity analysis by adjustment of discount rates or energy prices and so on. So in time, or in view of the time, I will more or less skip the next few slides. It's just if you're interested, some impression from the tool, but you can also directly access the tool online. And we are currently working heavily on improving the user experience of this tool to have it even more streamlined. So yeah, you just can, as I already mentioned, say what you want to investigate, give the energy savings, say what kind of improvement or end use you want to target, and then you get directly the result page where you can investigate the physical values, of course, across the 3 domains, but also the monetization or the aggregation and cost benefit analysis. So that's from my end. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Niklas. I think we have no time for questions, so I would directly switch to Blazis. But if you have questions to Niklas, you can still ask him in the chat, and you can answer in the chat as well. So now we're moving to the regional level with the ENEFIRST project.
Yes.
I'm happy to let you the floor, Blazis.
Thanks a lot, Sebastian, and congratulations and welcome to all also from my side as a co-coordinator of the project. Jumping just before I start with the ENEFIRST, one addition to the previous presentation is that it responds a lot to the comment by Christos that we need some streamlining between the data used for the multiple benefits and all the environmental benefits. So MICAT and this MICA tool is doing actually this part. They try to have uniform values and adapted values per country so that the comparisons can be easier made and the calculations can be easier made. Now going to the ENEFIRST, okay, we are a bit more ambitious here in this project. It's a live program. You can just move to the next slide. It's about the implementation of the energy efficiency first principle in the regions. The reason actually we chose regions is because regions have the legal jurisdiction and status actually to accept investments in their territory. So they've got the territorial plans and they've got the regional plans where a lot of these investments of grid infrastructures, of electricity infrastructures, and of course efficiency measures have to pass and give approvals. The objectives of that we followed in this project are quite similar, I would say, to the ENEFIRST Plus, but here we speak more about the regional part. Is mainly to provide a decision support tool for the regions on how to adapt the regional plans to implement the ENEFIRST principle. The second part is to establish a community of practice, to have political commitment, because we have regional governments coming and going, and sometimes it's hard to achieve this commitment for a 5 to 10 years plan. and then to support to the extent possible on the implementation of a bottom-up implementation from the ENEFIRST on the NECPs, using a lot of this multi-level governance dialogue that has to take place from cities to regions and regions to national authorities. Next slide, please. So we've got 6 regions where this ENEFIRST will be tested, and we're trying actually to replicate it in 100 regions through the presence of FEDAREN, with has lots of members on energy agencies. And then next one, please. So we have to run a bit from the time. Now, what we found out from the first step is that we have, when we spoke to all the regions, and we carried out analysis on how they could perceive the ENEFIRST, and I think that's an interesting lesson for the Commission, is that there was the deliberation process between the national and regional authorities must be improved. So there is really not strong dialogue between the national and regional authorities when they plan the operational programs from the regions aligned to the NECPs. The second one, we go to the citizens level, which somehow we must have the social acceptance of the regional plans. And when we try to embed the ENEFIRST principle in the regional plan, we must for sure have more social acceptance, because we speak to citizens in the end, and the dialogue is not there. So there is really no co-creation concept on the way that the spirit of the directive says. Then the ENEFIRST principle, as we know, it's not explicitly incorporated. I mean, the national, you discussed it, but also in the regional part. Even when the evaluations of the operational programs for the regions was there, one of the criteria was the the mentioning of the ENEFIRST, and of course there was not any mention back then. Then the importance is this also what we saw is that there is a lack of the debate on the various levels of governance, and mainly on the regional and local levels of governance, on the efficiency aspects. And sometimes, indeed, what we saw when speaking to regions is that they confused the efficiency first principle with general energy efficiency. That's something that Veronica also mentioned in the beginning, that things have to be very much clearly understood. That it's not about only energy efficiency, but it's about balancing of investments and understanding the investment. Then the raising awareness and informing people, especially in the multiple benefits. Okay, this was very well addressed. And imagine on the regional and local levels, the MBs are not yet at all almost in place. And here it needs a lot of work more. And the funding streams also bridging in private capital on the efficiency market. That's again a story which goes more for the regions now. Then the next slide, please. So we have developed actually a framework which helps the regions to better plan their decisions. And maybe I can just go quickly through that. Maybe next slide. No, just so. There are different stages, steps, and tools. So each step and each stage has various tools which support it. It's often easy to use tools from multi-criteria decision support processes up to cost benefit and social cost benefit analysis. Next. Yeah, so there are 8 steps actually in principle. The one is the preparation of the regional program. And each one you can see that the steps are quite diverse. The stakeholders, the reviewing of the objectives and targets, and exploring the current regional energy system. Here I would stick to 1 second, because what we see is that in order to plan the ENEFIRST principle, you need data. In order to make up correct assessments, you need data. And when we speak about data, we speak about regional energy data. In some countries, due to the laws, the legislation system and the statistical sources, we do have that. But I would say in biggest part of Europe, we don't have accurate regional data on the energy and energy planning data. So sometimes it's quite generic, and that makes quite a cumbersome task to plan ahead and make up a regional planning based on demand and supply options to see what would work best, and balancing this type of investment. So that's something that we really need to focus on more. Next one. Then once we've prepared all the ground, we go to the CBAs and the social cost benefit approaches. We have various CBA tools to present in the project. We assess the options, and then we define the action to develop the plan. So everything is based on a structural approach, and that's what will end up to some concrete decisions on how these things can be modified on the regional planning process. And then the next one. Yeah, so an example of a CBA is SCBA. I think it was mentioned before also. I showed the study to Celine in the question that was made. So indeed, we try to carry out this analysis on some countries based on, it was a study, okay, for Greenpeace. And we try to check the implementation of the ENEFIRST through checking, let's say, balancing investments with the social cost benefit analysis on natural gas infrastructure and new grids versus against, let's say, the upgrade of building envelopes, the installation of heat pumps in households, the combination, and the combination of these scenarios with solar photovoltaics for zero energy buildings. So this was more or less the idea, and we tried to check the supply, so the gas, which is being implemented in these 7 countries versus the demand side. And maybe just once more, click once more. Yeah, and here's what we got from the various scenarios that you can see that in several of the cases, the cost-benefit analysis showed that the implementation of some of these options was not actually beneficial. And also when you take the social cost-benefit analysis, meaning the multiple benefits in essence and all the environmental benefits and all the other external benefits, it gets even worse, especially for the supply side investments. And you see that some of the investments in several of the countries are much higher, and they would generate higher societal value. Coming back again to what Christos said about maximizing the social welfare and where these amounts of the public benefits and the public subsidies should be given for. Of course, there is the other parts below where you can see the graph, which this is the political part that we have to take into account. And I think sometimes that's quite a lot neglected, is that when you opt in for an investment for a supply side, for instance, like gas, you can address a lot of households, while with the other investments, maybe you address less with the same amount. So it's always something that we have to balance it politically and see where and how to persuade actually people about the benefits of the energy efficiency. And that's where the multiple benefits do play an important role in this debate. Thanks a lot. And next slide is you can see the partners, and thanks a lot.
Thanks a lot, Vlasis. I think that was a nice way to close the loop for today. I thank again all the speakers, Veronica, Suza, Vesna, Christos, Niklas, and you. I think that was quite an agenda, and I hope that provided you with some food for thought for the next months until June and the delivery of the final NECP update. And with that, we stay in tune. You can find the last link in the chat. That's for a very quick feedback survey. That's super useful if you could answer it. That helps us to improve, know if what we provide is in line with your expectations. You can make suggestions and comment, and you can also let us your email if you want to receive the online survey we will share in the coming weeks about assessing priority and needs to implement energy efficiency first. With all that, I thank everyone and all the participants today, and we wish you a good end of the afternoon, and to see you again for our next activities. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye.
Bye, Vesna.